Hello everyone, I am Eclipse Mod. So far, I have only done video game videos. That being said, I am also interested in other subjects such as TV shows. So on what TV shows should I make a video about? How about Total Drama? Total Drama is not only a TV show I like a lot, but it's also probably my favorite TV show to talk about. There are so many interesting subjects to cover about this franchise that it's crazy. However, why not start with a subject that not everyone has covered before, let alone make a video about? The finalist of Total Drama. So Total Drama is a cartoon reality TV show, meaning that by the final episode, we end up with only two contestants remaining before determining the winner of the season. And what's interesting is that ever since the first season, Total Drama seasons have had two alternate endings depending on which of the two contestants win the competition. Then I asked myself, which season chose the best contestants as its final two? Here is how I will judge each season's final two. First, did they play a role in the season that makes it so they deserve to be in the final? You can do that by providing multiple memorable moments, going through character development, or being a source of conflicts throughout the season. Ideally, there shouldn't be better choices than those two finalists in that season. Second, do the two contestants have a good contrast with each other or a good chemistry? Having two contestants that are perfect for a finale is great, but it's even better if on top of that they are very interesting to compare to each other or if there is an intense rivalry going on. Third, am I okay with any of them winning? Like I said, there are multiple endings in Total Drama, and what would be ideal is if whatever ending I watch, it is satisfying to see who wins. This means that both contestants should deserve to win the season. It's with those 3 points that I will judge each of those final two. I should also specify that this ranking is based on how good the finalists are and not how good the final episodes are. This means, for example, that we can have a season with a terrible final episode be super high on this list because the finalists themselves were a perfect choice despite the terrible final. With that out of the way, let's get started. Also, spoiler alert for the end of every Total Drama season. Like, obviously. Something to make clear about this ranking is that it is not a representation of how good the season is overall. Case in point, despite the Redonkulous Race being one of my favorite Total Drama seasons, it's the one that gets the last spot with the Cadets versus the Surfer. Also, yes, I forgot to mention, but I do count Redonkulous Race in that list, despite not being a Total Drama season technically. Why? Because it's my list. Now, the reason why this is the final two at the bottom of my list is that with every other season, you could make an argument that in the way they are currently written, their final two is pretty much the best we could have gotten. I can't really say the same with Redonkulous Race. Now, the Cadets are absolutely perfect finalists for this season. They are quite entertaining, and MacArthur gets one of the biggest character developments in the season, which makes them perfect candidates for the finale. It's not to mention that they are worth keeping them around if only because of their big rivalry with the Ice Dancers. No, the bigger problem is with the Surfers. Now, the Surfers are very entertaining to watch. I will give them that. However, they don't really give finalist vibes. In my opinion, a much better fit would have been the sisters. They were a very epic pair that was full of determination, and very entertaining. And I feel like most people feel the same way too. But we will have only girls in the final two. I mean, I guess you're right, but I also don't care. Especially since Revenge of the Island had two boys in the final two. But if the sisters go to the finals instead of the surfers, they will get eliminated right after coming back, which is kind of lame. You're right, but if it is really that big of an issue, I don't think it will hurt too much to have the Ice Dancers at 4th instead of 3rd. They had plenty of time to be the antagonists. Being there for a shorter time won't make things that worse. And then you can have the surfers at 3rd. Better yet, don't bring back the surfers. Make it so the injury of Devon doesn't happen. In fact, it might be cool to see how the best friends compete now that they are a couple instead of being out of the game the moment they become a couple. It's part of what made Jasmine and Sean one of the coolest couples in total drama after all. And then you can eliminate the best friends in the next episode. Because they don't give that much feminist vibe, so it's fine to eliminate them here. Speaking of bringing back the surfers though, that's the other reason why they don't really fit to be the finalists in my opinion. It's just weird to have a team that was eliminated in the middle of the season and then come back and end up being a potential winner of the season. I can't be the only one who finds it weird. But hey, even the worst section of finalists in the series is far from terrible in my opinion. And the finale itself was enjoyable. Way more enjoyable than the All-Stars finale. Therefore, it's not the end of the world. Speaking of All-Stars, next we have Zoe versus Mal. The main reason why it is higher than our last final two is that for the story that All Stars told, it makes perfect sense to have Mal and Zoe as the final two. They were clearly the characters with the most focus in the season, and there is a duality between the two characters, so that's nice. Plus, we gotta give credit to the All Stars writers for being able to make a good versus villain final two without having the villain win, since Mal is an alternate personality of Mike, and by the end of the episode, Mike becomes the personality in control again, so a bad person isn't the one winning by the end. However, this is still far from the greatest final two. So first, me and a lot of people don't like Mal. I must be clear that how good a character actually isn't that important when we compare a good character with an even better character in terms of writing. Especially since there are many amazingly written characters that are clearly not meant to win. Good examples are Aiden Lashana, who doesn't make sense to be in the final two when throughout the season she was mostly supporting Gwen in her struggles and didn't struggle that much herself. And Revenge of the Island Brick, who got eliminated in pretty much the perfect way to end his character arc. However, when a character is bad, that is when it becomes problematic. Because it does hurt the final episode at the end of the day. Second, while I did give credit for making a hero versus villain finally without making the villain win in either version of the ending, I still prefer the version where Zoe wins way more because Mike was possessed by Mal throughout most of the season, so he got way less occasion to shine throughout the season than Zoe did. Finally, while a Mal vs Zoe finally is ideal for what All Stars currently is, with multiple modifications to the script, we can come up with a much cooler final too. There are many people that came up with their own version of All Stars with a better Final 2, but what's fascinating is that I came up with a Final 2 that doesn't require that much modifications to the script to work. You know how in All Stars Courtney was kind of jealous of Zoe, which led to some sort of rivalry? Well, what if we took advantage of that by having Zoe versus Courtney finally? All you need to do after that is remove most of the events in Sunday Muddy Sunday that prevented Courtney to get her redemption, and also make it so she ends up in the finals against Zoe, which can be tricky to do, but not impossible. And boom, you end up with a final 2 of the OG generation versus the Revenge of the Island generation, with 2 characters with a rivalry between each other, and 2 characters that both deserve to win, since Courtney got her redemption instead of being ruined by Sunday Muddy Sunday. It's almost a perfect final 2 that way. So while All Stars Final 2 isn't as bad as the final episode itself, it is far from the best Final 2 teledrama as known. Listen, I have no idea how I should rank Beth versus Duncan. You see, on paper, you could argue it is the absolute worst Final 2 of them all. Beth and Duncan have barely any contrast with each other, and they don't have finalist vibes. Duncan in particular pretty much became Courtney's pet throughout half of the season, so it feels wrong to have him in the final 2 of this season. But on the other hand, I tried to come up with a better final 2 for Action, and then I remember that I am trying to find a better final 2 for freaking Total Drama Action. You see, if you want a take from me in this video, I don't know if Total Drama Action is the worst Total Drama season, but it is definitely my least favorite season. And the shortest version of me explaining why that is that it is a 26 episode long season with barely anything in it. And when barely anything happens in a season, barely anything happens to the characters as well, which means they can't really shine and become true finalist potential. The only contestant with a true arc and could have worked as a finalist is Shauna. Now, this is not me saying that Shauna should have been a finalist. In fact, I think the way she was eliminated was well handled, and I like what they did with her in the aftermath. Instead, it is more me saying, if you're not going to make Shauna a finalist, could you at least do more stuff with the other characters? A popular replacement for the final 2 is Lindsay versus Harold, and I guess it's better, but only because those 2 characters did more stuff than Duncan. Beth did just as much stuff, and in fact you could argue she did more. There is also Duncan versus Harold, which at least would be a rivalry between 2 characters, but even that rivalry wasn't that intense if you ask to me. So in short, Action's Final 2 might be kind of lame, but at the same time, how can you make an interesting Final 2 for Total Drama Action? If you want me to know more about my opinion on Action, you can ask me to review it, and I might do that someday. But let's stop here for now. Total Drama Paquito Island is a fascinating season, because the more I think about it, the less I know if it is absolutely genius or pure garbage. And believe it or not, the final 2 of Sky vs. Shawn is a perfect representation of that sentiment I have about this season. That is because when it's explained in a certain way, it feels like Path to Island as one of the best final two ever. But then you watch the final two unfolding and something that doesn't seem to work. Now, the final two make perfect sense. They are both very important characters to their season after all. More importantly, the contrast between those two characters is one of, if not the most interesting out of any Total Drama seasons. And it all comes down to the relationship they have with the people they team up with in the final challenge, Dave and Jasmine. You see, Sean and Jasmine show how with effort and communication you can create a healthy relationship, even in an environment as rough as the show Total Drama. Sky and Dave, meanwhile, show what happens when you don't do any of that, which results in Dave becoming a total incel. This kind of contrast is super cool and interesting and can teach a valuable lesson, but if that's the case, Sean should always win, right? I mean, Sean learned the right lesson, and Sky didn't. In a show like this, especially where children are part of the demographic, you should be rewarded for learning the right lesson and be punished for learning the wrong one. It's simply more satisfying this way. It's not like real life where anyone can win without any particular meaning or even thanks to morally wrong choices. If that was the case, there wouldn't be a point to make this video because any final two is perfect by that logic. But there is an ending where Sky wins, so what is this show trying to communicate to us exactly? In fact, that's a problem with the character of Sky in general. The show seems to be on her side and say that she isn't in the wrong. And while I agree that Dave is much more in the wrong than her, Sky is partly responsible for why her relationship with Dave didn't work. And like, I wouldn't have any problem with that and her winning if she wasn't interested in Dave and that we got interactions like the ones between Roxanne and Al in Megamind. However, she did have feelings for him, so she should have made a slight effort for it to work. It doesn't help that Redonkulous Race and Total Drama Island 2023 showed exactly how you can put feelings aside to focus more on winning without ruining relationships with characters like Emma and Bowie. Because of that, when I watch Paquito Island, I either wonder why Sky is even able to win in one of the endings, or I wish she was more like Emma and Bowie, so that she and Dave can have an healthy relationship. Basically, Paquito's Final 2 has something very interesting to say, but because of multiple possible endings and other details, it doesn't fully stick the landing. Bowie versus Priya is the pure definition of a Final 2 that is just good. That's because there aren't a lot of things to criticize about it aside from the fact it could have been even better. Priya and Bowie were a clear highlight of the season, and it makes perfect sense why they were chosen to be the final two. Total Drama Island 2023 has very few truly emotional arcs, and Priya is part of the most important one in the season. Meanwhile, Bowie was arguably the most strategic player in all of Total Drama, on top of being part of the only good romance in the season. However, this is a perfect example of two characters that makes sense to bring in the final two on their own, but don't contrast with each other in interesting ways or have an interesting rivalry or something like that. Now, to be clear, I don't think that lacking those things is bad, it's just that this far into the ranking, having an interesting contrast between the finalists can make the difference between a good final two and an amazing final two. And Bori and Priya don't have that, so they get to be placed lower. And what's interesting is that I probably came up with a final two that could be better, and the best part is that it requires less changes to the plot than a Zoe versus Courtney finally in All Stars. And that final two is Priya versus Millie. But those two are best friends. How is it good to have them against each other if they are best friends again after the penultimate challenge where they reconcile with each other? Well, the first option is to simply not make them reconcile after the penultimate challenge, so that there is still tension between the two, but we can make it more interesting. Honestly, I think it could be very interesting to have two very good friends going against each other, but still showing that they can be very competitive and willing to win. That's something we never saw in Teledrama aside from the brief time Zoe was against the true Mike in All Stars. It could even be Millie's chance to prove that she can compete without Priya's help. So it even shows character development on top of all that. The other good thing this final two would bring is that I would be happy with either Priya or Millie winning. Don't get me wrong, I love Bowie, and he is a better overall person than World Tour Alejandro and Revenge Lightning. But spoiler alert for when we'll talk about those two, they wrote their endings in a way that it's not too frustrating to see them win. Meanwhile, Bowie isn't necessarily a bad person, but he was sort of an antagonist by the end. He is the reason why Priya was mad against Millie after all. Because of that, I am just happier to see Priya win. But that might not even be a bad thing actually. Okay, let's talk about the elephant in the room. As far as I know, Teledrama 2023 doesn't have an alternate ending. At least, not yet. The only ending that I know exists is the one that Priya won. And if it stays that way, then I can't even complain that there is an ending that Bowie wins because it doesn't exist yet. Because of that, I won't bring this final two down on the list due to Priya winning being the much better ending. It's also worth noting that every time me and other people talk about Teledrama Island 2023, that the sequel of that season isn't out yet, and that unlike all the previous Teledrama seasons, it was clearly made with a season following it in mind. Therefore, a lot of things we currently find incomplete about Teledrama Island 2023 might be covered up by the following seasons. I say that because maybe Priya vs Bowie will become a more or less interesting final two depending on how season 2 follows up on it. Until then, however, it will stay at the number 4 spot. It was extremely hard to choose what final 2 should be at number 3 or number 2. By the end, however, I chose Heather vs Alejandro in World Tour. This would probably be the number 1 of a lot of people, and I totally understand why. Especially when some people don't even care about the criteria of the two endings being satisfying, which is the only questionable part of this final two. In fact, this is probably the best moment to remind you that how good the finale of the season is doesn't solely determine how good the final two is. I say that because World Tour's final is probably my favorite finale alongside Revenge of the Island. So if you tell me Heather and Alejandro should be in the top 2 or even the number 1 spot because it has your favorite finale, keep in mind that it doesn't determine how good the final 2 itself is. That being said, what does Heather and Alejandro have going for them? Are they important? Dude, Heather and Alejandro aren't important to World Tour. They are World Tour. Most of the best moments in Total Drama World Tour are related to Alejandro and or Heather. In fact, if we pretend the Alejandro and Heather stuff as well as the jokes, since every Total Drama seasons have good jokes, don't exist, I end up with the songs, Lindsay being at her kindest and most entertaining, and the occasional Sierra and Cody moment that is very good. That's pretty much it. This really shows how much of an impact Alejandro and Heather had on the show. To be clear, you don't need to be a very important character to a season to be finalist worthy. In fact, the two pairs of finalists ranked above have at least one contestant that some would consider to not be that important to the season. However, being an important character is the easiest way to be finalist worthy, and Heather and Alejandro are arguably the most important final two of them all. So that surely gives World Tour some points. And then the people who never watch World Tour might wonder if having those two against each other is particularly interesting. And the people who did see World Tour would probably be like, bruh. The main reason why those two characters are so important in World Tour to begin with is because Alejandro is the biggest villain the series have known thus far, with him being pretty much the cause of the elimination of almost every contestant there. Meanwhile, Heather, thanks to being a villain herself in Island, is the one person that was able to see from the start that Alejandro had bad intentions, and probably the one person he had the most trouble manipulating. That made it so Heather was Alejandro's biggest rival, and also made her go from a villain to an anti-hero. If somehow that's not enough to make them a good pair, there is also a sort of romantic tension between the two. So yeah, there is definitely something interesting to do with them being together for the finale. However, I did say Alejandro was the villain of the season. Wouldn't that be a problem to have an ending where he wins? Well, it would be, but it turns out World Tour worked around this. You see, no matter the ending, we end up with the prize money inside a volcano and Alejandro being burned so much that he ends up in a robot suit. Therefore, no matter the ending, Alejandro just ends up losing, if you see what I mean. You could argue that Heather losing the money is unfair, but when you think about it, while Heather did the most good compared to the other seasons, that doesn't make her a good person. After all, Heather is still Heather, and most of the good she did was something that could help her get further in the competition, and very rarely something she did purely because it was the right thing to do. And even in those moments, like when she gave Sierra something to cover her bald head, it's not like she had to sacrifice anything to do so. Therefore, it's fair that she also doesn't get the money in the end. As long as Alejandro gets the bigger punishment, it's all that matters. There are only two reasons why this final two isn't higher. The first one is simply that the other final two are better. The second is that even though they made a good job having Alejandro win without rewarding him for the stuff he did, I still prefer the other ending, because while I think it's fair to not have her get the money, I just think the idea of Heather winning is too cool to pass up. It's just cool to have her prove that she could get this far without always being mean to everyone. Her getting the money doesn't matter to prove that. Still, this is an amazing final two that gets the reputation it deserves among teledrama fans. For the most part, Cameron vs. Lightning in Revenge of the Island is great for similar reasons as Alejandro vs. Heather. Therefore, if you accuse me of putting this final two higher because Revenge of the Island is my favorite season, let me at least explain why this final two is so great. First, this might seem like a final two that is kind of odd, and I hear people saying they don't like it, but I actually think it was very well chosen. You could make an argument there are characters more important than Cameron, and especially Lightning, but those are either villains that straight up don't deserve to win or get that far, or characters that ended their main arc as they were eliminated. So there is no point in keeping them further. Zoe and Brick in particular literally sacrificed their chance to win by doing what they think is the right thing to do. So in their case, eliminating them was essential to make their arc stronger. That's why I love Revenge of the Island so much. Every elimination has a purpose, which is something I would go more in depth if I end up reviewing that season. As for the characters that aren't big villains or didn't end their arc as they were eliminated, they aren't that important to Revenge of the Island anyway, so at this point you might as well have Cameron and Lightning as the final two. Not only that, but the coolest part about Cameron's character is that he is a super weak teenager that never got out of his bubble until he entered teledrama, and yet he ended up in the final two. And he proves that he is worthy of being in the final two by building a freaking Iron Man suit in the middle of the final challenge. That's a really cool underdog story that wouldn't be as strong if he wasn't in the final two. Plus, his friendship with Zoe and Mike still makes him an highlight of the season. Now, Lightning by itself seems like an odd pick, but then you look at the events that led to him becoming a finalist and see who is up against, and everything makes perfect sense and you realize it was pretty much a perfect choice. At one point, Cameron tricked Lightning to make him win the challenge, and ever since, Lightning doesn't like Cameron very much. So entering the final challenge, there is some great tension between the two players. In case that wasn't enough, with Cameron being a big nerd that is very weak physically, and Lightning being a somewhat dumb but extremely strong jock, this makes for a cool Brain vs. Brown finale. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I have this final two higher than Heather vs. Alejandro. World Tour might have a very strong tension between the two finalists, but not only does Lightning vs. Cameron also have that, but more importantly, the Brain vs. Brown dynamic makes it more interesting if you ask to me. On top of that, he did have an interesting dynamic with Joe and is a very entertaining character, so there is some value to Lightning beyond just having a good contrast with Cameron. However, like Heather vs. Alejandro, one of the two finalists did considerably more main things throughout the season than the other. Indeed, Lightning, while not as mean as Scott, Joe, or even Anne Maria, you could argue, is sort of an antagonist. If not, he's at least an anti-hero. I said Cameron manipulated him to make him win a challenge, but the reason why Cameron even did that is because Lightning made a promise to help him win the challenge. But then he didn't respect his promise, so Cameron made it so he helped him win the challenge without him knowing. Not only that, but Lightning is clearly the kind of guy that prioritizes winning over anything else. So knowing that, you might think that Lightning winning would be frustrating, but like World Tour, Revenge of the Island found a way to work around that. Before the final challenge began, Cameron and Lightning got to talk with their parents, and they both got extra motivation to win. Cameron learned that if he doesn't win the money, he might not be able to afford getting a bubble to protect him. But more importantly, Lightning learns that his father betted his ring on his son winning the competition. So now Lightning doesn't want to win only because winning is cool, but also because he doesn't want to disappoint his father and make him lose his ring. And if he wins, at least you are happy that he will make his father proud. You might think that it still would be unfair because Cameron wouldn't be able to play his bubble, but no, because after finishing the final challenge without any injuries, and this applies with the version he wins as well, he discovers that he doesn't need his bubble anymore. And then you might say the version where Cameron wins is inferior, since Lightning is sad about not winning for his father. But when Cameron wins, because he doesn't need a bubble, he decides to share his money with all the other contestants. So the ending where Cameron wins still has its own upside. Also, if you want Lightning to not disappoint his father, but don't want him to keep the money, it turns out the injuries he got might force him to spend a big chunk of his money to cure him. So there is still some karma around. Because of that, if you prefer one ending over the other, it won't be because one is superior to the other necessarily, but because of personal preference. I prefer the Cameron ending because how can you not be happy about Brick going to fashion school? Come on! So yeah, this is a great final two, but from the start I knew there was one final two it couldn't beat. So, by process of elimination, you already know that my favorite final two is Gwen versus Owen in Total Drama Island, the very first final two this TV show has seen. This final two is just absolutely perfect. To start with, alongside Redonkulous Race and Action, which to their credit actually do a good job in that area, it doesn't mean much in the case of Action where I just don't care, but that's besides the point. This is easily the best season at making me happy about who wins no matter what the ending is. None of the two finalists we have in Island are bad people that do not deserve to win over their opponent. Gwen and Owen are just good people that generally have their heart at the right place. There is no need for a big workaround to make it so one of the two contestants doesn't keep the money or something like that, because you are happy with any of them keeping the money. Sure, Owen is generally a much nicer person than Gwen, but Gwen doesn't go out of her way to make people suffer unless they deserve it, and the fact she is arguably the contestant in Island that went through the most struggles does make you want to see her win about as much as Owen. Not to mention that Gwen does have a good goal of using the money to help herself with college, while Owen just wants to make a party. Heck, Gwen wants to share the money with Owen due to a deal, and in her ending, she still uses part of her money to make a party, so you get your party in either ending. Isn't that cool? So yeah, there is value in both Owen and Gwen winning the challenge. And it once again all comes down to personal preference. Okay, both endings are cool. But is it cool that these are the two finalists for Total Drama Island? You bet it is. Gwen is pretty much a no-brainer. I don't consider Total Drama to be a franchise with a definitive protagonist, but if I had to choose who I consider to be the protagonist of Total Drama Island, it would be Gwen. She gets quite a lot of screen time. She probably went through the most struggles out of any contestant. She has an arc of learning to appreciate the world around her more. She is one of Heather's worst enemies, who is the antagonist of the season. There is a romance between her and Trent. She is basically one of, if not the most important character in Island. Owen is much less important, but he is still an ideal candidate for the final two, even without considering any of the things that makes him contrast with Gwen. He is an extremely nice guy with quite a few moments and challenges where he was a standout player. Not to mention that, like with Cameron, the fact he went this far makes for a good underdog story, because he might be an idiot and he might be bad at certain challenges, but thanks to the few moments where he actually performs really well, and his likable nature making it so people really want to vote him off, he managed to cut it out and end up in the final two, and that's really cool to see. He's also very entertaining, so that helps. And we haven't got to the best part yet. Because Owen and Gwen are cool to bring to the finale on their own, but the fact these are the two against each other is even cooler. Owen and Gwen contrast so well with each other that it's crazy. Owen is a very positive guy that likes almost everything. Gwen, meanwhile, is almost the opposite. She hates a lot of things and rarely views things in a positive manner. The writers are clearly aware of this, because before the final challenge starts, both contestants get to the confessional to express how they feel about their days on the island. And you see Owen saying how much he loves everything on the island, while Gwen says how much she hated it. That is honestly such a cool dynamic. And despite those differences, they don't necessarily hate each other, and that's very interesting to see. Really, this final two is the most perfect final two we can have in Total Drama. I don't think the finale itself is the best or most epic finale we had in Total Drama, but whatever prevents the finale from being the best in Total Drama, it certainly isn't because of the final two. And what are your favorite final two in Total Drama? Don't hesitate to comment your opinion and explain why you think so. Until then, I am Eclipse Mon, and I wish you a good day, or night, or anything else.